Hi everyone, my name is Natalie. Today I wanted to do a kind of a different video. I wanted to share some of my bookish buzzwords. So I've seen a few others do similar things and I find it fascinating because of course the buzzwords are just general things that will pique our interest. As soon as we hear them, we are just sort of more on board with whatever book is described with those particular words. And I feel like they definitely show a lot of the preferences and tastes that we have all over as readers and sort of the niche things that speak to us. And so I thought that I would share a few of my bookish buzzwords. These have high value to them, so they are almost certainly gonna be effective in selling me a book, if that makes sense. So yes, I just wanted to share them. And also, if you think of any books along these buzzwords that you think I might like, then definitely feel free to share. The first one is linked to a name, and that is Wes Anderson. So I think I've seen about 4 to 5 of Wes Anderson's movies, and I just love the style of them, especially the latter ones. The tone of them, sort of the focus of very detail-oriented settings or setups, more like, and also sort of the internal order of things. Whenever there is any sort of link to Wes Anderson, whether that is that he has gotten inspired by something or that the book has Wes Anderson vibe to it, I will definitely be more interested in it. It doesn't even have to actually mention Wes Anderson, but if I feel like there's a connection, then I'm also more intrigued by the book. The next one is maybe an obvious one if you've seen some of my reading in the last maybe 2 years, and that is classical music or classical instruments as a central theme or topic in a book. If there is a memoir or any nonfiction dealing with classical music centrally, that isn't sort of a textbook kind of music theory book, then I'm interested. If it's a book about a classical musician, then I'm definitely interested. Both nonfiction and fiction. Even the building of the classical instruments I find so compelling. I think there's part of this is just that I love classical music, and so I love the exploration of this as a theme, but also I think there's something almost magical to me about classical instruments and the building of them and the sound that they produce and the way that classical music can almost become siren-like. The next one is one that I've mentioned before. So I did a couple of months ago, I think actually during Nonfiction November last year, or maybe even before that, I made a video asking for very specific recommendations. And so one of the questions I had, I think, was about people working in a museum, curation of a museum, things like that. There's actually a very new release that I know has a connection to a museum, and that word was the only thing I needed to be curious about this book. I will put a picture of it here because I can't remember the name of it. It's a very new release, and I actually have already put a hold on it through my library. There is another book that I've just picked out from the library that also fits into this category, and that is From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil Frankweiler. This is a middle grade book, and this actually fits with the Wes Anderson thing as well because there's a quote by him. I was looking for books potentially to read for middle grade March. So this sort of also picking this up this week made me realize how easy I am sold by a book whenever there's a museum anywhere in the description of it. The next one I have is islands. So I think it was Mercedes who also did a bookish buzzword thing, or maybe even asking for recommendations, where she mentioned this as a thing that she's always interested in, people living on an island or stories set on islands, and that's definitely something that I feel as well. There's just something about the isolation of an island setting, the fact that it's usually surrounded by nature of all kinds, and sort of the wildness of that I think is really appealing to me. And because I love nature writing and natural history, there's that sort of overlap, and especially because islands tend to have a quite quiet and slow kind of living. The next one is the one linked to the museums, and that is naturalists or scientists. So basically I've found that over the last couple of years really, I've become more and more interested in science. I think it's probably just the fact that I've had enough distance from having to study it in school and having sort of negative experiences of that, and being able to explore it just by my own curiosity. It has also been a thing that I've been more interested in fictionalized accounts, both in terms of famous scientists and sort of science discourse, and the way that especially if you're going back in time and seeing the history of science and progress, and the way that big scientific developments have been made. Seeing the way, especially the reception of that, I found really interesting in historical fiction. And hand in hand with that is naturalists, which of course was a big thing up until the Edwardian era. The amateur naturalist was a really common thing to be. If you had money and time, you could very easily just dedicate your time and life with the study of nature. And so I think there's something about that that just fascinates me. And also there's sort of the openness of the field also meant that there was a lot of women who were participating in this field. Natural history, science, and naturalists and scientists, all of those things I find that I'm drawn to both in fiction and non-fiction. The next buzzword I have is a hermit. Whenever there's a main protagonist that is described as a hermit, or someone just basically living in solitude or with a fairly small social circle, that is an immediate selling point for me. And I think it's probably just the fact that I'm a big introvert, so I probably just feel calm with seeing that kind of character in books, and yeah, it's a very quick way for me to become interested, and I think often also this tends to overlap with someone who is quite focused in their interests. Often I think it shows a person who has a very specific interest and they just sort of put all of their energy into that one thing, and that might not be something that other people see as valuable, but I admire something about that. Next buzzword, which is art history, or just relating strongly to art in terms of painting. I think I am equally interested in the techniques and the production of a painting as I am with the interpretation of a painting and the value that it gains afterward, after the creation, the way that it can become this mysterious thing, the way that it can haunt people, the way that it can put people under a spell. The next one is a recent interest, although it's been sort of a long time coming, but I hadn't realized how strongly I was curious about this thing, and that is psychiatry. I would say that it's sort of connected to psychology, so I've always been more drawn to books that have a strong psychological element to them. But recently I've been reading a few books on mental illness, and so I've become more interested in the treatment of mental illness and psychiatry as a profession, as a field. Also the way that it links to crime, because there's a strong relationship going there for several years and decades really. I think it's just become this thing that I've over time realized that I'm really drawn to, and at the moment I feel like psychiatry is something that I'm mostly drawn to in terms of nonfiction. Another thing that I've very recently discovered as a buzzword for me is anything relating to law. I'm really interested in the way that the law both the way the law actually looks and also the way that it is applied in real life in cases, and the way we understand it, the way it changes over time, how it changes, what kind of norms it reflects, so many things within this area. And I always thought that I would be so bored by this, because I mean, the law text is boring to read, but the meaning of it isn't. So I think that's something that I've changed a little bit on my opinion on in the last few years, and especially recently, becoming more interested in the work of lawyers, the work of prosecutors, the work of judges, the cases themselves, and the internal way of the system. I'm particularly at the moment interested in this in nonfiction, but I might be interested in sort of a lawyer's perspective in terms of fiction as well, or a prosecutor, sort of the big actors in the system, to see a fiction book from those perspectives that isn't necessarily like a crime thriller. But if you have any literary fiction recommendations for books with judges, prosecutors, or lawyers as main protagonists, then definitely let me know. Those were all the bookish buzzwords that I wanted to share with you today. So do let me know if you have any book recommendations for me based on these. I always really appreciate you taking the time to share those with me. And also let me know if you have any bookish buzzwords of your own. Any buzzwords that just will instantly make you more interested in a book, or might even just make you add a book immediately to your list. I would love to know about that as well. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I will talk to you soon.